Today was a monumental day for legal action for those being tried for their roles in the insurrection that took part at our nation's capital earlier this year, with the first felony defendant being sentenced in court today. 38-year-old Paul Hodgkins from Florida, surprise, was sentenced to 8 months in prison for his role in the riots, 10 months less than the 18 requested by federal prosecutors trying the case. Hodgkins was accused of being inside the Senate chamber with rope, goggles, gloves, and a Trump flag. Hodgkins repeatedly told the court he was sorry and that Joe Biden was the rightful president. All this comes as a new wave to erase January 6th from our consciousness takes hold. Nearly 100 people protested outside the D.C. jail yesterday to protest the arrest of those involved in the riot. During our conversation is NBC Washington's investigative reporter Scott McFarlane, Eddie Glaude, and Christina Greer are also back with us. Scott, I'll start with you. I just want this repeated for the public. In a recent interview that was published in Vanity Fair, the former president said that he saw officers hugging and kissing people, and there was a lot of love. You're there in Washington, D.C. Were there any hugs and kisses going on during the insurrection?
In fact, Jason, the former president says he saw tapes, videos of hugs and kisses. I've watched all the tapes. No hugs, no kisses. Today's sentencing was significant, Jason. Paul Hodgkins gets less than half the prison sentence prosecutors were seeking. Despite the fact prosecutors pulled out a big legal gun, they said Hodgkins was part of a domestic terror act. And the judge expressed deep concern that Hodgkins was part of a mob that forced the evacuation of Congress that day. But here's what I can say was notable during the hearing. Hodgkins apologized, says he doesn't blame politicians, only blames himself, and then said that he recognizes Joe Biden Jr. as the rightful president of the United States. Let's see what message this all sends to other defendants. Do they, too, now step forward and plead guilty and accept responsibility, seeking a lighter sentence? Or do they fight, seeing that a judge didn't give the feds everything they wanted, Jason?
So here's the thing. I want to take this to you, Eddie. I don't care what this guy says. I don't care what kind of Chris Angel cosplay he's doing before he goes into court. This was not about loyalty pledges. This is not about going in and saying, I think Joe Biden is the rightful president of the United States. This is about the fact that he was part of a terrorist act. How frightening is it? How problematic is it that a judge basically looked at a domestic terrorist and said, I'm only going to give you 8 months?
You know, Jason, history haunts. In fact, Hodgkins, his lawyer invoked Lincoln's second inaugural. Right? He said, in effect, that if the judge handed down a harsh sentence, it would lead to further division. Right? That, in fact, to hold this man accountable would deepen the threat, the divide. To use the label of domestic terrorist when it was, in fact, hyperbole. All of this is the very kind of language that we know was used in order to reconcile with the South that left us with this contradiction. There is this hesitancy to confront these folk because they're our brothers, they're our sisters, they're our neighbors, they're our aunts, they're our children. There are these intimate relationships that blocked the way to holding these people accountable. 8 months? You know people, Jason, just like I know people who are doing 10, 15, 25 years for selling a dime bag of weed. So part of what we have to do is to first see this as the disjunction that it is in terms of the criminal justice system, and also view it as a part of our historical refusal to hold ourselves accountable for the ugliness that has often divided this country, violently divided this country.
I'll tell you, Eddie, that's not us. When we say hold ourselves, because this is being cut down amongst racial and political lines. Dr. Greer, again, when I saw this video, when I read about this Rob Zombie lookalike with a MAGA hat, the first thing that occurred to me is thinking about a black woman in Texas who was sentenced to 5 years for voting by accident. I think about all the different instances around the country of African-American people and poor people being thrown into jail and losing the key for years for crimes that were significantly less dangerous to our country. My question, going back to what Scott said at the beginning, is this actually going to encourage further terror? Because an 8-month bid, look, if you've never been to jail, any time in jail isn't good, right? But an 8-month bid is nothing for a crazy zealot revolutionary. And I think that this small sentence will actually encourage more people to attack this country.
Absolutely, Jason. Why wouldn't you, right? I mean, if you know you're going to get a slap on the wrist, barely. Why wouldn't you just do what your passions tell you to do? We know that Donald Trump stirs this up. I mean, but this is exactly what Eddie has just said, though. When a judge looks at this man and probably sees a boy and says, well, I don't want to ruin his life, right? We saw this even with some of the Capitol police officers who didn't, use their weapons. They said, well, I just wanted to talk to them. I mean, they look like me, and I was afraid that I might hurt them. We don't get that same grace and compassion when we're talking about African Americans interacting with the criminal justice system, with judges, and definitely not with police. And so it's a larger conversation. And I'm going to say it again. This is where white people must do the work. I mean, if you're looking at this 8-month sentence and knowing that a domestic terrorist stormed one of the most sacred buildings in our nation with the intent to threaten and or kill elected officials on either party, which we've seen, and you think that 8 months is not okay, you need to talk to every single member in your family and community and explain to them exactly why it's not okay. Explain to them why it is that we have African Americans who have tried to vote who are sitting behind bars for over 5 years. We have to explain to people, just as Eddie said, where the criminal justice system looks at Black people as non-deserving, non-worthy, and criminal. We can understand the language that the former president used during his entire tenure, thinking about Black Lives Matter activists and calling them animals and vicious, right? Using that type of language to desensitize people for punishments that African Americans should receive in his mind, and also punishments that white people should not receive because they are more deserving and they belong in this country according to the Donald Trump ethos. This is the hard work that is sustained and continued, and it can't just be around particular events. It has to be a daily conversation that so many people have with their family members to change the mindset from the ground up so that it actually permeates our elected officials.
Family members, community members, co-workers, and members of Congress need to be having that same conversation. NBC Washington, Scott McFarlane, Eddie Glaude, and Dr. Christina Greer, thank you all for spending some time with us today.